All right. I think it's time for us to start the seminars. I'm going to do as a lot of my students do when they present. I'm going to use the mobile phone to kind of help with my memory. So we have today here with us, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have with us Viviana Meschitti or Meschitti? Meschitti. That is it.
So X, because X, the H, the Italian is skirt.
Ah, Meschitti.
Yeah.
What about the
Meschitti.
Meschitti? Yeah. Meschitti, okay. Sorry, as you can see, 3 months in Italy didn't improve my Italian at all. She's an associate professor in organizational behavior and human resource management at the University of Bergamo. If you have the opportunity, visit the University of Bergamo. Bergamo is beautiful. Beautiful place in Italy. Previously, she was a senior lecturer at the University of Huddersfield in the UK from 2017 to 2021, and previously a research assistant at Birkbeck, University of London. She got her PhD from the University of Lugano in Switzerland. Let me just add a little bit about her research interests. They are related to organizational and team learning, communities practice, leadership and group dynamics, gender equality and career progression, which relates to the topic today, and the implementation of gender equality plans, which also relates to the topic today. And she particularly focused on qualitative research methods. And I'll leave it at that. So, Viviana, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you a lot for this introduction. It was great, excellent. So thank you a lot for inviting me, and thank you to the public, the ones here and the ones online. So in this presentation, please feel free to stop me and make questions, even while I'm presenting. Don't wait till the end, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff. I don't want to bore you. I want you to be awake, and I want you to be active. I know it's Friday evening, so almost evening. This is a kind of old-fashioned presentation. Why? I'm presenting an argument here. You know, it's a little bit like when you write essays. You use the literature to develop your own argument, and that's an argument I developed, and something I'm working on, and I will show you how and why. So let's go ahead. The topic is about gender equality plans. So we know that in academia, we focus on academia. I focus on Europe here because it's, you know, I grew also as an expert, as a practitioner in this field in Europe, in Switzerland first and then UK. And then we'll talk about, you know, we know we have a problem of gender equality university, very few women get into the top. And gender equality plans in Europe have been there for long, but still we are struggling. So let's look at data first. You know, when you're working on gender equality, they always teach us, you know, to look at data first. This is from Figures, so regularly the European Commission is publishing this kind of data about women in science. This is about the typical academic career. This diagram is called sometimes leaky pipeline because, you know, the argument is that it's like a pipeline with leaks. We are missing women as we go ahead. So when we look at this is using the international classification. When we look at 6 and 7, these are bachelor and master students. As you see, when we look at the bachelor and master students and even people getting a PhD, 8, you know, we are more or less, you know, there's some parity there, the proportions, some more or less 50 and 50. Problem is that already when we start to go to assistant professor, lecturer, then grade B, senior lecturer, or associate professor, and then full professor. You know, there's a big gap there. Here it's about 2010 and 2015. There's not real meaningful change. What's even more interesting instead is to look at 20 years ago. So here we have 2002 and 2010. The pale line is 2002, and the darker brightest line is 2012. What's interesting here, already 2002, we had quite a good number of women, 41%, getting a PhD in 2002, so 20 years ago. At the time, full professors were only 50%, so there's something going a little bit better there, slightly. But when we look at this 41% of women getting a PhD, 20 years ago, you think, where is women gone? You know, in 20 years, it's quite a large gap. Typically should be enough to be associate or even a full professor. So why they're not there? The good thing, if you notice, is that here we had some dropout for both women and men at PhD level. Now we don't have a dropout anymore, which is quite good. So we're not missing a PhD students, you know. But yeah, this was a situation, you know, 20 years ago, already a great number of women getting a undergraduate degree. And yeah, a good number of women getting a PhD, but where are they gone? So let's start to look a little bit into the literature that I'm using. I think I use quite a well-known, I'm introducing quite a well-known concept which explains why women are not there. I mean, this idea of a gendered organization, it has been there from the 90s. You know, all organizations tend to reproduce the kind of division of labor, you know, we're in society. In relation to that, people work on this idea academic. It's just a way to refine the idea of gendered organization and to make it focused on universities. So the ideal academic basically is the person working 200% on academia with no other ties, you know. And of course, we have other metaphors. For example, the well-known glass ceiling, so women are not getting to the top. Do we have others? Do we know other metaphors, other interesting metaphors? Can you think of others? Well, the glass ceiling is very well known, you know, this idea that when you go to try to access top positions, you know, there are problems. It has been a little bit criticized. Interestingly, it was introduced, I found this interesting, in a New York, no, I think it was a Wall Street Journal, anyway, in a newspaper in the 80s. It has been criticized because they say, some scholars say, well, actually women might meet problems all along their career, not just when they try to access top position. Can you think of other metaphors that maybe you use to indicate these, you know, struggles when it comes to women's careers?
About the pipeline?
Yes, we talked about the lead pipeline, yes.
Not about career, but I remember there was the expression of sticky care to describe women academics struggle.
Yeah.
That was.
I have something similar here as well. Others?
Old Boys Network?
Oh, yes, I don't have that one, but yeah, that's another one. Other ideas, metaphors, concepts you think of? The literature is plenty, and some of them they got very, very famous. Well, glass ceiling, glass escalator is again the idea of glass making things more difficult. You know, the escalator, I go to the top, but it's a glass escalator. Glass cliff as well. This is interesting because it indicates that women are pointed to top positions when their organizations are going through struggles. So there was some research showing that basically when a company was having financial problems, it was more likely for a woman to be promoted as a CEO. This is Ryan and Haslam research. This is the first contribution that they made others. And there's even a contribution within universities, I think. They looked for women being appointed as rectors or head of departments, and it was more likely when universities were somehow struggling. Well, this is about women leaders. This idea of a double bind is about women leaders being judged along two different lines. So as women and as leaders, where as a leader you are supposed to be assertive, but as a woman you're supposed to be caring. So, well, there are some about motherhood penalty, maternal wall to indicate the challenges when you have children as well. And that's the sticky floor. yeah, there are different with this idea of a sticky, in this case, a sticky floor, because it means you are stuck already at entry positions, which is also interesting. And actually, there's some research, and especially in Italy, some scholars are especially looking into this sticky floor, like women having difficulties accessing the first academic position. Well, what do we have to do then? You know, we have all these problems. After 20 years at least, you know, still issues are there. What can we do? Did you work for some company or university, or we have some experience of, you know, an organization trying to do something? And I think there's something here at Hong Kong University.
Oh, the promotion tenure, but that's not only for the women.
Yeah.
Anyone who have children, they can extend promotion, that kind of support.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, I think, some kind of equal opportunities, equal opportunities policies, yeah. Well, very often we say of equal opportunities. So, for example, even for grants, sometimes, you know, if you have children, if you have some leave, you can kind of discount it. It's a way to support individuals. I've listed here a few of these measures. So first of all, again, we are back to data. I mean, it's not straightforward sometimes for organizations to have gender disaggregated data. Sometimes, you know, even at university, I remember a few years ago, we were saying, okay, and what if we really want to look at, for example, women who applied for promotion, you know, women and men who applied, got rejected, and all of this. You know, in some cases, they don't keep the data, you know, by gender, which is important. And as we often write, you know, you always need to know the local case, so you really need this data. And then I think a traditional measure, some traditional measures to, you know, for women careers, some mentoring or women's networks to exchange ideas, or having a mentor who is a more senior, typically colleague, who can kind of guide you. Actually involving women in key events, so to avoid the all-men panel, you know, sometimes we're in front of this issue, that's an important event, and women speakers are not involved, you know. Why? Sometimes there's this kind of bias. And I remember there was an interesting case when I was working in London at Birkbeck. There was an important event, like 10 speakers involved, all 10 were men. There was a case then in the school because they said, well, we are in a business school, we have plenty of women. How come we have 10 speakers, 10 men, you know? Yeah, it went also on the press, it was not very good for the institution. Clearly, you can focus on the individual needs, on career pathways. So, for example, as we mentioned, for people who have children, you know, if you want to extend the time, you can apply for some positions, promotion, and so on. Transparency typically is always good. I mean, we have a plethora of measures, typically integrated in what we call gender equality plans. And I mean, there are many, there are EU projects, at least in Europe, EU projects were very important. I mentioned, I worked for one called the Trigger. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, or sorry, I think Australia as well, we have this initiative called Athena's One, again, to promote gender equality plans. And you might have others, you know. Why it's also important, you know, when we look at these measures, I think it's important to look at the focus, because some of these measures, they really look at individual careers. So, at the person, the academic, the individual academic, who wants to progress. Some others, when we're talking about, you know, policies, practices, gender disaggregated data, transparency procedures, and so on, you're looking at the organizational level. And this is important because it is argued that you want to change, you know, this level of the organization. In the literature, you will always find something like, oh, you know, when we look at individual measures only, we want to like fix the number. We should aim at fixing organization. Some other scholars say, put the case, Londa Schivinger was one of the first ones to argue for fixing the knowledge. like she was making the argument that very often anything in relation to gender studies, equality, and so on, it's kind of undervalued. And that even when we do research, typically we don't consider gender differences very much. Even, for example, if you do research in medicine and so on. And of course, there are arguments about the fact that, gender differences, the way we look at gender and what we expect from women and men is part of our cultures. So you need to somehow change this kind of culture. We might talk about institutional, organizational culture, academic culture, epistemic culture, so disciplinary culture. Because actually, a point some scholars stress is that gender is a practice. So basically practice because it's something that we do somehow. We behave as we think people might expect us, as a woman or as a man to behave. So there's something about social expectations going on here. I really liked this point, which comes from Marieke van den Brink and Jennifer de Vries, who worked also a lot on gender equality plans, to look for an approach which they call bifocal, that is, it's somehow easier in organizations to promote that kind of measures, such as mentoring, which really focus on individual or leadership training. In the experience and also in my experience, I can say it's easier somehow to work with these kind of measures. More difficult to change organizations, but then we needed to involve a large number of stakeholders in order to use this kind of measures, even mentoring or leadership programs, measures focusing on individuals, in order to try to change something higher up. So we need to use a kind of bottom-up approach together with the top-down. This is a kind of, I put ideal model. So when I was working for this European project called Trigger, basically, initially they were kind of teaching us, this is how you're supposed to proceed. So first of all, you look at this data, gender disaggregated, you need to look at data to know about the local case, and then use all different kinds of approaches, which you see around here. So try to identify key stakeholders, decide who will be the change agents, involve clearly men, involve people at different levels of organizations, create teams, work groups, work using both top-down and bottom-up approaches, and so on. It's a kind of ideal model. Of course, we like to have it, but it has its own challenges, and we know that sometimes, for example, especially at the EU level, as long as you have an EU project, money coming in from external institutions, people are quite keen to do something. But what happens then afterwards, So, for example, in the EU, they stressed a lot about sustainability. So after 3 up to 5 years after a project, you still need to show you're doing something, and that your university is still trying to address the issue with their own funds. But sometimes it's easier to kind of satisfy you are doing something because maybe you organize a panel, an event, and you say, oh, okay, I did something. But what really changed? So that is really much more difficult to check, even for the European Commission. And it's a challenge because sometimes project is finished, okay, that's done, And also another issue, people change. You might have, for example, a pro-vice rector or rector who is very keen to work on this. People are changing and we're back again, So it's really, really an issue. So let's go a little bit more into what I'm trying to argue here. Here I'm again looking back at why it's so difficult in academia to work on gender equality. Well, we know in academia we all have this idea that we are rational around here. We are very objective, so there's no space for bias. We're already the good ones. So no space for any mistake. Maybe some of you might remember there was quite a few years ago, but there have been many experiments like that. There was this famous experiment which went on the media about the selection of women musicians for an orchestra. As we know, orchestras typically, for many years, have been made up almost by men, professional orchestras. And in this experiment, the scholars so asked to do a selection just based on the music. So the committee, the selection committee, couldn't see the musician. They could only listen to the music. And after that experiment, many more women were selected. And similar experiments with, matching CVs as well, which is interesting because, then it shows that some kind of bias is there, even when we argue for, we are very objective. In academia, there's this very big discussion around meritocracy and equality. So can we be fair, meritocratic, and somehow support equality at the same time? And it's quite complex because you will see sometimes you interview women and they say, oh, I don't want to be supported. I don't want to be part of it because I want to show that I got to the top because I'm good, So it's a problem as well. Clearly, there are power issues involved. I mean, if we're talking about making more space for some categories in some powerful, let's say, places of an environment, of an academia, of a university, clearly we are talking about power, who has the power. Of course, you will have resistance. People tend to be afraid of changes. We know that, so you will have resistance. And there's some interesting emerging literature on gender as a paradox. A paradox means that you might have opposing situations happening at the same time. So I put an example here. This idea of support. So sometimes women, to access an important network, people say, oh, they are kind of supported. But actually, this kind of support networks have always been there, not just for women. But, because women are sometimes, in some environments, still a kind of minority group, or, other groups as well, like ethnicity, depending on ethnicity. When people say, well, they need support because they're not able to do it, So it's a kind of paradox. You might remember or not who is this woman? And yet, well, maybe here she looks a bit younger, but well, she's Sheryl Sandberg. She wrote this book, Lean In, 10 years ago. At the time, she was chief operating officer at Facebook. So people, she's quite famous. People kept talking for her for a while. Clearly, she was one of the first few women getting to top positions, especially in a technology company like Facebook, And basically, she's saying, well, it's true we have a problem, but the problem is women sometimes have a problem because they don't really push themselves. They don't break their own barriers. They create barriers for themselves. So leaning because, you need really to push yourself. And if you want to access a leadership position, go for it, and don't put yourself on a barrier. So this argument that sometimes women put barriers on themselves, on their career, was quite controversial, because sometimes you might be very powerful in your own position, very motivated to go ahead, to progress, but it just doesn't happen for some reason. So her book, which, I mean, she sold quite a lot. She didn't really need it. She made money out of the book. And clearly, you know, she made people talk quite a lot and discuss, you know, what's the issue. I mean, she's from the US. In the US, there's this idea that, you know, it's always about your own kind of individual responsibility and choice, much more than, you know, in Europe or Asia. What I did now, I went sometimes saying, you know, I entertain myself going on websites of famous universities and look at what they say when we talk about women leadership programs. Women leadership programs are quite a fancy measure. I mean, we're in a world where everybody talks about leadership, effective leadership, great leaders, and so on. We like leadership. And women leadership programs sometimes are quite, you know, a well-known and well-applied measure when we are talking about gender equality plans. But it's interesting even what's happening there. Clearly, you know, as a leadership program, you aim at somehow upskilling individuals. But look at the description. I didn't put the name of the university here. Look at the kind of descriptions we can find. So this program is ideal for high-performing women with, of course, 3-7 years of experience in the rest to advance. I mean, high-performing women, it sounds a bit weird because, you know, you really have experience. You are working for a top university. This is already a program for academics. I mean, high-performing. Imagine a program for high-performing men. It would sound a bit strange, you know. We welcome high-achieving, high-potential women. Well, of course, I mean, but again, this idea of potential, we often hear about potential. It's, you know, having high potential is good, but think about the idea of this idea of potential. What does it really mean? Because the potential is something you might show in the future. I mean, think about defining potential. It's really difficult, and it's difficult to be fair on which base you think a person has high potential. It's not really easy. And actually, when you think about potential, well, quite a lot of bias can go in there, you know, while you have 2 candidates in front of you, maybe they are quite a junior level, and then you say, oh, but this one, I'm sure he has a good potential. Well, why, you know? Again, this is about the outcomes of a leadership program. Look at this one, address current career challenges. Develop a clear career action plan towards senior leadership roles. I mean, this is a program, as I said, already for women who are at quite a senior middle level. Well, develop a clear career action plan. I mean, does it mean that you're not really clear on your career? And again, the focus is really on the individual. Here we talk again, women, unique leadership skills. They will gain the skills they needed to communicate, negotiate, and lead with confidence. And very often there's this stress on confidence, getting more confidence. So again, like if the problem is you miss confidence, you're not confident enough. Again, what you gain, a greater sense of confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, and a sense of feeling supported. Oh, you know, poor little girl, she doesn't feel supported. I mean, there's quite a rhetoric, you know, when it comes to these leadership programs. This I found it on Forbes. They were talking about leadership program, and then some guy was saying, oh, you know, the female brain is naturally wired for long-term strategic vision and community building. I mean, you know, the emergence of female leaders can become a centrifugal force for good in the world. Well, clearly, I don't believe in this idea that we are naturally kind of, you know, set on some specific traits. I find it quite amusing, but if you look at, you know, this stuff has been published on quite, you know, important websites and blog posts, and with a lot of people reading this. And well, I like the image of a women leadership position. And again, there's a lot of stereotypes and biases and many things going on also around how these women in leadership roles are represented as an image, which is also interesting. And we could open the page also about the kind of Western or US centrism here, you know. Okay, let's go back to more serious. This is what I was trying to do. Well, you know, we have these gender equality plans, many measures, but at the end we are still, you know, making this selection based on excellence or potential, which are very difficult to define and make sure you're applying, you know, these in criteria which are at the end somehow measurable or fair. Of course, there are stereotypes as well about, you know, women's image, and as I said, very Western or US-centric. We say that women needed to learn, or stressing on so-called feminine kind of traits. So we are trying to change. How can we change the cultures? You know, if we do that when promoting that, you know, a leadership program, for example. Of course, a leadership program is about people kind of reflecting and improving their skills. But can we do it differently? I mean, this doesn't seem it will help a lot in achieving equality and at the end making academic organizational cultures more equal. So what to do then? What's the real problem here? A couple of years ago, time is flying, with some colleagues, we convened a stream at the Gender Work and Organization Conference. We came up with some ideas, and that's especially, I will present what was my kind of contribution and what we are hoping to do now. Well, we submitted a proposal for a special issue in equality, diversity, and inclusion that we hope to get it out in 2024. What's the argument I was trying to build, and I would like to discuss and to work more on this in the next few years. When we look at a lot of these gender equality measures, clearly they are focusing on individuals' careers. So let's look a little bit better into this concept of career. I'm looking now in literature, which is much more inspired by political science. And especially when we look at theories of job segregation, because you know, when we are talking about not enough women at the top or not enough women in some disciplines, it's about job segregation. A lot of work there actually on careers and job segregation is based somehow on what we call neoliberal assumptions, and especially on the study of choice and individual choice, individual responsibility. And also an ideal of professions which actually don't really reflect the current market, the current job market. And this is one problem. So the focus on individual responsibility, first of all. And clearly this is what gets into these many gender equality actions. So career as a result of individual choice determination, basically, you know. Let's look a little bit better, you know, when we call them into these neoliberal discourses, what they are. I mean, we discussed a little bit when talking about redundancies, you know. Well, results prioritize over processes, numbers, productivity over creativity. They focus on productivity, so the link to academic capitalism. The idea also that neoliberalism in academia research limits somehow academic freedom and might even reinforce inequalities. And that basically this is working against, you know, any kind of gender equality. So we have a kind of problem there as well. The more they focus on this capitalist idea of productivity, the more we might risk, you know, having inequalities. And it's not just about gender, actually. A concept which is interesting here is this concept of co-optation. Is it known as anyone has read about this idea of co-optation? Okay, which is good because I'm introducing something new. So I found it interesting because cooptation depicts a process where, for example, we might talk about cooptation of gender equality. So we're not denying the gender equality, but we are somehow giving it a kind of a new meaning. So we will use it for giving to this gender equality a slightly different purpose in a very subtle way. And this has been done, well, in this way, actually, the risk is that you risk getting absorbed in the kind of structures, organizational structures you're trying to change. So, for example, if we talk about cooptation of feminism, I think this is quite, it can be quite clear. We talk about feminism, but in a way that at the very end is not contributing to change any structure. For example, in feminism, even the very first wave of feminism was really stressing on the freedom and individual choice, which is good. I mean, there's nothing bad about being free to choose your own career, to choose what you want to do in your life. But then with time, this has been translated into this idea that, well, if you're not able to make the very good choices, you know, then it's up to you. It's your problem. So this was the kind of cooptation. So the kind of policy, organizational structures, they have kind of, and discourses, they have turned the idea of feminism into a very different thing, you know. Originally it was about, yeah, freedom of choice, but for empowerment of the women. And now it became, well, you know, it's your choice, it's up to you, it's up to your strength, to your determination, which is a problem. There's quite a lot of literature, in philosophy especially, about this problem of individualizing things, making things down to individual responsibility. I took this excerpt from Rosi Braidotti. She's a philosopher I like a lot. Originally from Italy, she's working at Utrecht in the Netherlands. And actually, she, when talking about gender equality, but not only, she talks about many things. She's a philosopher, so she's not only interested in gender. But she's saying how this individualization then brings people to feel isolated. And that is the problem, because if you feel isolated with your own problem, which you don't want to talk about, because then it will be, you know, like your own fault. Well, this is a problem because we're not going to change anything at the very end, okay? This is why she talks about new forms of vulnerability. So the individual alone, isolated, hasn't really the power to change, to push for change. But actually, from a neoliberal point of view, well, this is not bad. If the individual feels like compelled to do the work, well, who cares, you know? Any question? I'm going towards the very last argument, and yeah, time is good. Any question till now?
Probably yes, but let's leave it.
Okay. So my argument is that basically, sometimes when working for gender equality, we are kind of forgetting this risk of cooptation. And sometimes we're creating actually what I call the new market of privilege. So it's a system which is modeling careers and the access to professions in two different ways. So somehow there's this definition of you know, what's excellent, which brings to a career path which is, I mean, quite a standard kind of career path, but that in fact is bringing to new power hierarchies. between women and men. And also this idea of equal treatment or equality is somehow limited, and the risk is that basically we are kind of opening the gates only to some categories of people and some categories of women. And we are kind of forgetting about differences related to class, ethnicity, and age as well. Because clearly the problem is not just about gender equality. Gender equality is important, but how it intertwines with, other issues. For example, we don't talk that much about class. I mean, social classes are still there. We are forgetting about this sometimes, even when I talk to my students, well, I mean, they are still there. And when we are supporting somehow some people's careers, well, which kind of people? So think about, I mean, class is quite important, and in academia is still important. I mean, ethnicity again, age, in some cases, you might be in front of age discrimination. In academia, we're quite normative. If you are too young, it's a problem. If you are too old, it might be another problem, And of course, sexual orientation. Also think about the impact in terms of, knowledge, the kind of knowledge we produce, we promote, we talk about with our students, which is related to the concept of epistemic diversity. So what we are going to discuss, to problematize, for example, with our students and our colleagues. So this is my question, and the question we had also with the colleagues I was working on this special issue. How much are we, creating this new market of privilege, and is it really there? What can we do to make things different? To work on equality in a different kind of visionary, or at least broader way, in order to address also other issues, other problems, other groups of people. Yes, and this is.
All right, this is a very, very relevant topic. Oh, yes,
Please.
No, you want to finish or to add some more?
No, I was just saying that if, I share the slides with Monique, and then you have a long reference list. I'm not showing.
So any questions here in the room or the internet? If not, I have plenty.
Well, that's good. On which? Were we on Teams or Zoom? No, I just wanted to look if we had questions.
I guess Monique can.
Yes, I will.
Can let us know. All right, so if I don't have any question here from the floor, I'll ask some of them myself. To what extent? Okay, I have two questions. Actually, I have a paper with a former PhD student of mine where we asked men and female and male academics in a Chinese university what were their feelings about having gender equality.
It's the one, it's 2023 one on.
Yes, it's very recent.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know that, but we got really interesting, I would say, interesting results. And it's one of the parts of these results that I want to talk about, and I think you mentioned as well. To what extent successful women are co-opted into the whole structure and become part of kind of oppression of other women? Because it's very clear that when we come to female academics, we have a dual discourse in place. We have the discourse of the successful women who are saying, hey, I survived, I don't see what's the problem, which is the same that the Facebook lady is saying. If I can do it, you can do it. What's the big deal? Yeah. And then you have the other ones who are struggling and are saying, yeah, well, we need more support. And then this support might come or not, depending on kind of some movement that might be happening, more gender friendly or not. So I would like to hear a little bit more from you on that. And this is my first question. My second question relates to something that I didn't see here, but I believe it's becoming increasingly relevant in this kind of sphere, which is, so how did this LGBT plus movement helped or not, or complexified or not, this whole situation? So I would like to hear your.
But it's a great question. So regarding the first question, yes, I think it's really easy for successful women to get kind of co-opted into this. And I think it's somehow, actually what really puzzled me when I was interviewing a few years ago very senior women, you can see some of them are co-opted, some others not, and they really fight, for. And I always try to say, what happened to these women? Why some of them are co-opted into the system? And while others are fighting so strongly for younger women, and I'm talking about women working in the same institution, which is really astonishing. There's quite a recent and difficult paper by Mariana Fotaki. She's originally Greek scholar working in the UK. She's kind of using this psychodynamic theory, like Jung and so on, and arguing that actually it's very easy when people are successful to get co-opted. So it really looks like there's a kind of primordial fear that if you're not part of the system, if you're speaking up against it, then the system will reject you. And this is a problem. There's also something very interesting coming from social psychology. If you get Eiffel, this very old literature, but actually they make an argument that when you are really a minority, when you feel under threat, or when you think you are under the lens of scrutiny, it's easier to distance yourself from the one who are somehow struggling. So my answer is that if we really don't try to change something at organizational level in policies, procedures, and creating a message where it's absolutely fine to talk, for everybody, to talk about career struggles, if we don't do that, so if we don't create a good organizational atmosphere, people will just go into this. I mean, it's so easy to get co-opted when you get success. And I think somehow many organizations in the private sector are much better at working on having an organizational climate which is open to discuss about career challenges, career threats, and how to get support. So creating a message that, support at some steps of your career is good for anyone. Anyone can need some, might need some support. And of course, we are all in front of struggles at the same points in our career. But I think it's something really organizations, universities should work at, the broader policy level. Otherwise, I think it's very easy for people to get copied and say, okay, I did it. My point. Second question. I think it really complicates somehow the issue. In the UK it's quite felt. There's a lot of debate about is LGBT, is sexual orientation part of gender equality struggles, or is something special with its own features? And somehow, some people once convinced me that actually, they were saying, well, basically, if you put everything under the gender equality, it means nothing will be done. We have our own struggles and we want these struggles to be recognized. The risk somehow from other groups might be a kind of fatigue. So it's a kind of fatigue towards, oh my God, now we have to think about women. First it was women, now it's, people with special needs, and then LGBT, and then this. We are in front of fatigue. So it's really difficult. When I was working at Birkbeck, where I was a dean, he was great. He was saying, we really need to work on making this a friendly environment for everyone. So let's work on making a good organizational climate first, and then it will help. But yeah, it's difficult even, when you have a person like that, then it's good. And when this person is leaving, then what's the next?
Okay.
Yeah, there are some questions.
Oh yeah,
up.
we have a question online.
Oh yes. What specific factors success? I mean, I think success very often is down to being able to change something at policy level, even in universities, because sometimes you might have a great change agents at top level, but in academia, I mean, clearly people change. People don't stay vice rector forever. Of course, universities typically run quite democratically, and if people leave, then it's a problem. So you really need to be able to change something at policy level, and that is good for success. Even if sometimes, there are very, very smart way to work around even policies for a gender equality, but it will be another chapter, this one. But, how do different European countries approach the development and implementation? Yes, so the European Commission has stressed a lot on the importance of tailoring gender equality plans to the specific university. And I think it's very I think in your paper you put something about the local context as well in your 2023 paper. So they needed to tailor measures to the specific context. So to start from data and the problem you have in that context. So there are very, very different ways to address gender equality. And I think what can be learned, what I've seen it work well, it's really when people take the time to sit down and try to interpret this data, what they are saying, what this data are saying, and then to try to involve people to design your own strategy. It's bad I don't have an answer, because it really depends on the context. But if you want, you can email me, and there are some handbooks anyway which have been developed at European level, and they show some good practices or some successful cases. They might not work for everyone, but they are somehow inspiring.
All right. Any questions from the floor here or for?
Yes, thank you so much. It was really interesting. My first question is about this women's network kind of thing. Again, to follow up the successful women stories, we hear this culture discourse like queen bee syndrome. So women don't support other women. Actually, women who make this really high position, they don't want other women to be in the same position. That kind of discourse. And junior academics, they don't feel like they are supported by senior female academics. So a lot of recommendations are related to this women's network. They have to support each other. I wonder how whether there are kind of studies or literature to show this effect or really meaning value of this women's network thing, because it doesn't seem like working that well, women's network thing. That's my first question. Second question is about more European context, and I wanted to know, a lot of these university leaderships, committees, positions now, they do this kind of quota. You have 4 people, 2 people should be women, kind of allocation to make a balance. I wonder how common it is in the European university or Italian universities and how it is working.
So yes, in relation to quotas, in Europe, for example, it depends if this is compulsory or not. It depends on the country. In general, there's this kind of there's very often there's the policy that you need to have a balanced kind of committee. So even if it's not compulsory, typically there's this policy. There's literature showing that actually it helps. Well, we know somehow it helps, and it should be done. There's also some literature showing that with no quotas, basically, parity will take like 120 years or something like that at full professor level in academia, in Europe at least. So we really need the quotas in committees, and some scholars argue even when promoting people up.
I see that same in Australia. They do the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's not acceptable nowadays to have a committee which is not mixed, you know. It doesn't solve all the problems. Well, about women networks, again, it really depends how this is run. I think this queen bee phenomenon, sometimes again, the problem is, you know, the organizational climate around it, because clearly if people feel they are somehow under threat, they will more often behave as a queen bee. Women networks might work sometimes or not, depending also on how they are facilitated. So, for example, when we tried to create with the Trigger project our own women network, we were really looking into people who could really be able to create a good environment, not an environment where, you know, I'm kind of showing up, because there's always this risk. And sometimes I heard also from maybe PhD students saying, you know, I don't want to go there because in any case, this woman is too successful for me. I feel it's just too distant, it's too much. I can't recognize myself. So I think facilitation is important. I mean, a network doesn't just happen by itself. It really needs somebody who's good at facilitating it. So.
All right, we have two questions online. You want to answer them?
Yeah, the point on gender, enhance epistemic diversity for knowledge production. Well, of course, I think an important point is also to question what we are teaching also in the classrooms, and of course, what we do as a researcher. Yeah, this is really up if we are part of a network. It's really, it might be challenging maybe sometimes to propose something different, but yeah, we should always try to. I mean, again, it depends if it's research which you do as an individual and then you're free to do basically whatever, or if you're doing research in a network. Maybe you can find your own allies. So you learn, like, you know, who are people who can be good allies if I really want to go into this topic or into this kind of action. I think it's always good. How to become a change maker? Well, I think it's important to kind of be aware that, you know, even if you maybe don't consider yourself as a role model, actually you always are somehow. Because even if you, I mean, even if you say, oh, you know, I'm very young, I just started my PhD, well, you're still a role model for someone else. I mean, at any point in your life, in your career, there's always somebody who's looking up at you. So be aware of this this point. Move beyond the structural violence of gender. Well, again, it's very, very difficult. I mean, think also about the fact that very, very often when working on gender equality, this is still very much perceived as women's work. And very often it's something you do on the top of something else. So it's extra time, extra commitment for you, which is also a problem when working on equality. Because if a university has nothing in place where, and you know, this is a dream. I mean, if you want to work on gender equality, well, it's up to you to find your time, your energies, and so on. And it's a problem, really. So, of course, you can try to do something to find allies, so people who share the same concerns. I think social networks might be quite good nowadays to create some networks and to share concerns and maybe good solutions. So later. Well, optimistic advancements or positive developments. Well, you know, sometimes what I found is really maybe you do like 2 steps, 2, 3 steps ahead, and at some point 1 step back. I mean, you're not always going back completely, but it's so difficult. And as I said, sometimes because in academia, people, at least when I was in the UK, and I worked a lot on this when I was there, people change so much. And you always had this idea that you needed to start people over again. What I found really interesting, is sometimes you find the people who might be quite resistant to talk about gender equality, but typically showing the data, and also showing these studies, doing experiments. I mean, the experiment on the orchestra, I used it so many times to convince people that actually gender bias is there, and when you talk to academics, you set them a few references, and then they say, oh, okay, this is interesting. Then, of course, you will find the people who can't argue and so on. It's a life job. So it's difficult. Sorry if I don't have a clear-cut answer, but yeah.
Let me ask you, since I'm not seeing any more questions from the floor for the time being, let me ask you one more question. You mentioned institutions, but we know that universities hardly reform themselves by themselves. The church and universities are two of the most resilient and resistant to change organizations, and maybe that's why they were so successful. They lasted for such a long time.
Somehow, yeah.
But I was expecting then to see a bit more of the role of public policy, because a lot of the change comes from public policy. And then this has a dual question here. One is, what's the role of public policy, and why are you not so focusing on it in this framework?
Yeah.
And the second question is, what are the drivers for institutions to do something about this topic when the cultural societal environment is against it?
Yeah. Well, why I'm not focusing, yeah, you are right. I think I didn't focus that much on public policy. This is something which comes from my experience in the UK. So there's this initiative in the UK called Athena's One, which has been rolled over even in Ireland and Australia. We can consider it a public policy. Like at some point, basically, what Athena's One asked, Athena's One is a framework for gender equality. It's an award, so basically there are these 3 levels: gold, silver, and bronze. So under Athena's One, you might, you create basically your own gender equality plan as a university. Then this gender equality plan will be reviewed, will be assessed, and if it's reputed to be quite good, you might get a bronze or silver, or it depends how good it is. Why is it important? Because in the UK, they decided a few years ago that if you don't have any Athena's One award, you can't access some public research funds. And then they broadened it to other kinds of research funds, you might want to apply to as an institution. So clearly, as an institution, I mean, if you're telling me, you don't have Athena's One, you can't apply to these funds. They started with medicine first, because in academic medicine, there's really a huge problem. I mean, at least in Europe, for years and years, we've been having so many women having a degree in medicine, and basically a small bunch of women going into academic medicine. So they started there, and then they rolled it over to all the other disciplines. Clearly, for a university, that's the incentive. I should get Athena's One in order to, apply to these research funds. They're doing something similar now for Horizon 2020 in Europe. So you should show your gender equality plan, your commitment to gender equality, in order for your institution to be able to apply for funds. What happened in the UK, but there are also a couple of quite recent papers on that. Everybody was keen to do with Athena's One gender equality plans. First of all, it became very quickly women's war. you know, and not part of your workload allocation, you know. And I don't know how many hours you can spend on these panels, but it's not really, you know, even in a system, a workload allocation is supposed to be important, you know. And they found quite very interesting narratives. They were very good at building narratives to show that equality was important, but in fact, nothing was really changing inside of a university. So I think the problem is in universities, you might have people who are clever enough to write very, very, you know, excellent narratives about the commitment towards equality, but nothing really was changing. This is why, I mean, from my experience there, public policy helped only, you know, just a little bit. Clearly, there are other cases where it really helped a lot, because when, for example, I was in Switzerland and I looked at data again, there they launched 20 years ago Swiss federal programs for equal opportunities. They put a lot of money on it, and clearly they had interesting advancements. But you know, the rationale was a bit different, because in that case of Switzerland, I mean, they have money and they really were giving money to universities to build their own projects, their own gender equality plans. So universities were getting extra money. In the case of Athena Swan, like in Horizon 2020 now, it's, you know, you need to show your gender equality plan. Well, of course, you know, you will always find people good at writing these kind of narratives in unis, but they are a bit of a negative. So, but it's important. Clearly, public policy is important. My country, Italy, is a peculiar country, because our laws actually, you know, at the very, very broad, high level of laws, we are very good. But actually, when you look at the gender equality plans in universities, you find some good pockets of good practice, but nothing very well integrated, really. And we are still a bit struggling, you know, with a number of full professors, but also at the very bottom level, at the very entry level. And clearly, in the case of Italy, in many European countries, EU projects were particularly effective because they are bringing extra money. But then, you know, EU projects are just for some universities only, because you need to apply. And universities applying are typically the ones who are really interested, you know. So it's a kind of vicious cycle. And now you will find in Italy some universities who are excellent at this, and others have nothing, you know, almost nothing. So
yep.
You had another question? No.
Yeah, which is what are the drivers for institutions to do anything at all in social cultural environments that are completely against or unfavorable, let's put it that way, to this kind of gender equality programs, policies, and ideas?
Well, I think, well, apart from money and research funds, but I think public exposure is always quite an important driver as well. So if you're somehow able to kind of support university even in showing how, you know, how good they are in, you know, doing some measures, clearly this is quite an important driver as well. So, but yeah, having extra research funds, I think it's always good.
All right. Any questions? I don't see any question online. What about the floor? Yes, one, please.
Thank you so much. And just out of curiosity, I'm kind of wondering, so what do you think are the biggest differences between East and Western culture in terms of success in female career? Because as you mentioned a lot about Western defined success in female career or Western stereotype of females. I was just wondering what are the differences between East and West? Yeah,
I think the effect of stressing a lot on individual success, which I feel is really a very kind of US Anglo-Saxon derived kind of narrative. This about, you know, showing how excellent, how good you are with your own kind of choices, determination, and so on. It's very, very US. I think then there are very interesting cultural differences even inside Europe, because you might find some countries where kind of collaboration and networks are much more important. And it's also an interesting difference. I think this point on supporting women to get their confidence is very Anglo-Saxon US one. In my experience, I mean, well, Asia is again very big, I'm generalizing, but you don't really find this about women needing confidence, women needing to get more confidence. It's really a US narrative, like women lacking the skills, upskilling women. I think this is really Anglo-Saxon. And this, well, it would be interesting to open a chapter about the cultural differences. The point on supporting women confidence is very Anglo-Saxon one. So, and yeah, and individual, no much importance to collaboration networks. That is again something very US-centric, I would say. Yeah.
All right, just to finish, we have here two very intelligent master students that actually, in my course, they proposed gender equality policy in Japan. Do you want to briefly say what your idea was, and can you just tell them if it's a good idea or not? Very briefly, come on, you can do it.
When we have the talk, so the assignment is to choose from OECD countries, choose one country and to design a policy for that. Then we find only 2 Asian countries and we select Japan as our target. Then we find the gender problem is quite intense there, and we start from there. And the course we're kind of in science and policy, so we would like to do something in the STEAM field, for the STEAM field PhD and academia. So our policy is called Japan Childcare and Academia kind of plan. So we help the academia or PhD students when they get preference. We afford them childcare services, so they will not have kind of drop out their PhD or the stop of their career. And we extend out their kind of years from 3 years to 6 years. And we also promote scholarship for them. So this is mainly our policy.
And the kindergarten.
Kindergarten in the university. We select, like there are 40 universities in Japan that have STEAM PhD. We have like 20 firsts in the first round. They can apply by themselves, and we kind of critique them as the first round. Like the total budget is 100 million, and for running like 10 years.
Okay.
First stage.
Yeah. Well, I think Japan is an interesting country. I mean, it's challenging. I think it's the most challenging, probably culturally speaking. The kind of broader culture. So yeah. So did you do some search and you find that actually this is the problem, like people getting stuck or leaving PhD because of cheap? Wow.
To bring more female PhD students to STEM fields and academics as well. By on the one hand, providing kindergartens and plus support for them to get established in the very beginning of their career.
I mean, this really reminds me what they did in Switzerland 20 years ago, to the very beginning of the program. No, really. And it's interesting because even in Switzerland, it's a very conservative country. Yeah. In some areas of Switzerland, and we're talking about central Switzerland, I mean, the capital of Switzerland, Bern, around that area, I remember I had colleagues moving there. Imagine that children go to school only 7. Primary school, they start primary school at 7.
7
years old.
Yeah, 7 years old.
7 a.m.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, well, they as well. No, actually, they might go to school at 7 in the morning. Why? This is a stereotype. They should learn about Swiss culture, and the Swiss culture is also observing counts, No, really, I know people, I know children who went at 7 a.m. in the stables. to observe what was happening with milking cows, really. No, I can say, yeah, they go to the children when the stables at 7 a.m. because, even earlier, because they milk cow very early in the morning, yeah, and to show how you make cheese and yogurt and all of this. Well, in Bergamo, you start to work very early in the morning. Anyway, but the children, yeah, they go to school at 7-year-old. And typically around 11:30 in the morning, they leave school and they go home to have lunch.
Oh.
And it was really a fight for women's group, to have canteens in schools. Because imagine, how can you work if at 11:30, your child is getting home from school? And some areas of Switzerland, they have plenty of money, but they are very, very conservative. So culturally speaking, a very conservative country with a clear idea of gender roles, And 20 years ago, when they started with equal opportunities policies, they had this Swiss program. I mean, it's a small country. They have 10 or 11 public universities. It's a small. But some of their universities, like Zurich, are quite high in international rankings. So they couldn't show they had only at the time like 6% full professors, women. So they couldn't really, international, you can't show this. And they offered a lot in relation to childcare, really a lot, because that was like the weak link there. So kindergartens, if universities didn't have their owners, they started agreements with other kindergartens. Universities were financially supporting students and staff. Actually, the system was not bad because even as a staff, staff members, life is very expensive in Switzerland. So depending on, your salary, you could get 20%, 30%, 50%, 100% of the fee covered. And yeah, they did a lot in relation to, and also they expanded. So basically, they had different policies for researchers or for grants, even PhD grants. You could, they call it like stop the clock. So if they're externally funded, then, because till then, basically, you were missing out on research grants if you were getting pregnant. So you could, stop the clock. The university was paying you the leave, the maternity leave, and then you could go back to work on your project. Because again, at that time, but this was the case in other European countries, if you were externally funded, maybe nobody was paying you for the maternity leave. So, that was a problem. So they did a lot. I think, sometimes some scholars criticize these kind of measures because they say, oh, it's about women, they're taking care of children, it's always targeting women. But depending on the country you are and the kind of culture, to be honest, I think it's a very good idea. And, now in Switzerland, they have very good numbers of women professors. So
you endorse their policy.
yeah. Yeah.
All right, so I think we can conclude now. I don't see any more questions. So let us thank all of you for being here and for participating, etc., etc. This is the last chair seminar of the year. We'll come back in January with more. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, it's a very good idea.
Yeah.